Hello, and welcome to your AI CMO podcast. I'm your host, Pallavi Sharma, founder of WitOmni AI Marketing, and my mission is to help businesses not only harness the power of AI, but also build a future that's more inclusive and ethical for everyone. Every week, we talk to founders, operators, and technologists who are actually in the field building and growing in entirely new ways with AI. Today, we're going to be exploring AI through the lens of healthcare and marketing with someone who's been shaping this space for decades, the visionary Andy Day. Andy, welcome.
Thank you. Such an honor and a pleasure to be on this podcast with you, Pallavi.
Likewise, I'm so glad to have you on, and let me tell our audience a little bit more about you. So, Andy, you have been Chief Marketing Officer of Lightbeam Health and one of the most respected voices in healthcare AI, with over 20 years of transformational leadership experience, 1.8 billion in realized revenue, and a 7.3 billion sales pipeline generated. That is just mind-blowing. Andy, you've led the commercialization of 8 breakthrough enterprise software solutions for companies like SAP, GE Healthcare, Tableau, and Alteryx. I was at GE, so I'm especially excited to talk to somebody who is a former GE employee, even though we didn't know each other there. But I feel like every time I meet other GE alum, there's a camaraderie there for sure. So you've also delivered measurable outcomes for healthcare providers, physicians, nurses, and patients while transforming productivity and efficiency in enterprise marketing. Let me take a breath. Welcome. That's tremendous. Would love to hear from you.
Thank you. I'm so humbled with that amazing introduction, and I can't wait to get into the conversation. There's so much happening. You are in the throes of it. I'm in the throes of it. We are literally in the midst of probably the most life-impacting transformation our generation and the next will see. So I think it's really important that we talk about it, right, and get the word out.
I am with you and I feel the same way. I feel like as a marketer, I have to admit, before generative AI came about, it was starting to feel a little bit stagnant. And I've done some work with AI prior, but generative AI has just changed the game because it makes it so much more accessible. And I feel like as a marketer, I've just been reinvigorated with all the potential and all the change that's going to be coming about. So what I'm going to do is give you a couple of warm-up softball questions, but then we're going to get into what I call the AI CMO 9. And those are 9 very actionable questions that people can take the answers and apply to their businesses immediately. So let's get into the warm-ups. So Andy, you've led innovation in some of the most complex and regulated industries. What's one early career lesson that still shapes how you approach AI-driven transformation today?
Absolutely. I'm a pragmatic university now called Pragmatic University aficionado. So the early courses on pragmatic, both as a product marketer and a product manager, I've straddled both those roles. And one of the things that has stayed with me is this notion of nothing important or interesting happens in the office, which they call nihito. So that has stayed with me. It is funny, but also extremely profound, right? When you are in a product management or product manager's role. And I got to at companies like SAP where it's very customer driven. So had incredible opportunities working with reference customers, in working with them to design UI for a new product, or working with them as early adopter references. I also learned, so that was Nihito was one. The second piece is the notion of value-based consultative selling. Is all of the software at the end of the day, it's code that no one understands. How do you transform, how do you morph that into value that is actually delivered by the customer, that is meaningful for your buyer's persona, that is meaningful for the organization in impacting their KPIs and metrics, and that at the end of the day is meaningful for the user of the software who's basically looking to spend a little more time with his family during the weekend, especially on the weekends. So I think those were lessons that have stayed with me. That hasn't changed even in the age of AI, and actually has been instrumental to my success as both a product manager, a marketer, and as a CMO.
Yeah, I love that. And, I think with AI, people have to remember that one of the purposes or benefits of AI is that it allows you to be more of a human. And what does being more of a human mean? We're social creatures, go out, interact with other humans in real life. That is so critical. I know there's a lot of debates about return to office or whatnot. As a mother, I understand the needs for flexibility and all. But that being said, it's the inspiration and energy you get from actually meeting with people face to face is very, very different than anything you're going to get if you're constantly just behind a screen. So I love that advice so much. All right, so you've scaled businesses at SAP, GE Healthcare, Tableau, Alteryx, as I mentioned. Now, looking back, what's a pivotal moment or challenge that taught you how to turn emerging technology into a real world outcome?
So I think a pivotal moment was being hired by Tableau or for many of the other companies where there are a lot of assumptions being made, especially when entering new markets. So, for instance, a very huge fallacy that a lot of companies in the throes of amazing growth and success make is every market is homogeneous. So they usually and it's almost a stereotype. They experience very early success with retail and consumer products, which is usually where they start. Product, it goes out of the roof, huge early revenues, profits, early adopters, and they say, oh, we can now replicate this in life sciences and healthcare. And they go in and take in a retail demo and show that to doctors or physicians, and they're literally thrown out, right? And so that's when it dawns that there is a need for vertical driven go to market. And I think that's what I've learned really well, which is why Tableau and Alteryx both hired me to be a general manager and literally build upon their successes with their amazing brand. I mean, Tableau has been the most successful brand in the analytics space, visual analytics space, and they said, hey, we're experiencing all this success, but it's not, something's not working in healthcare and life sciences. How can you bring your experience from SAP and GE Healthcare and all of the secrets that you've learned, all of the best practices that you've seen, and leverage that to help us build a business in healthcare and life sciences? And so that's what I did. We looked at Tableau had already been adopted by big names in healthcare, from the Cleveland Clinic and the Mayo Clinic to Intermountain Healthcare to Cigna, Humana, United Healthcare. But no one had taken the time to put together the customer success stories, enable their sellers, get that word out into the press and the media, influence the analyst. And so I have what I call a 360-degree model for go-to-market. It's really a very holistic look across product and customer marketing, demand gen, digital marketing, analyst relations, PR, Marcom, partner marketing. And when you put all that together with the customer, really the voice of the customer at the center of it, you start
Yes.
to get the 1+1=5 effect, because it becomes a virtuous cycle versus a vicious cycle. And so again, a proven model, that I obviously delivered significant results at SAP and GE Healthcare. Put that to effect at Tableau, at Alteryx, now at Lightbeam, at Medi Analytics, and it always works wonders because customers, especially in a conservative industry like healthcare and life sciences, which is engaged in the business of saving lives, they love to hear from their peers.
Yes.
What outcomes have you seen? How have you seen clinical outcomes in terms of better outcomes for patients, operational outcomes, which is basically driving value, and then at the end of the day, financial outcomes. In, for instance, the healthcare business, the provider business operates at a very modest net margins of 2%. So anything that helps them save money while delivering higher outcomes at a lower cost is music to the ears.
Yeah, oh my gosh, that's so critical. And I love what you said earlier about turning a vicious cycle into a virtuous cycle. That is so key. And I think the element people forget is the voice of the customer. Keep the customer at the center. As a marketer, I always view myself as the voice of the customer because all too often, and we'll see this a lot in tech, is people get a great idea and they get so enamored by building the technology
Yeah,
and putting it out there and playing the game. They forget that ultimately you're trying to solve a problem for another human being. If you
exactly.
lose sight of that, it's going to be very difficult to scale your business. Always keep that human being and the problem you're trying to solve for them at the center. And I think that's why when you're trying to take solutions that have worked in industry A and then blindly apply them to B and it's not working, it's like it's a very different human. It's a different customer, different problem set, different way of thinking, and you have to figure that out before you can just kind of overlay a solution. Alrighty, thank you for
Oh,
that.
and by the way, that's replicating itself in AI as well. You literally have this schism, right, between obviously the current, incumbents who are building out innovation with AI, and then you've got eager beaver startups who have seen success with generative AI, for instance, in retail. And it's like, oh my God, the same algorithms are going to work in healthcare,
Yeah,
and they are not, right?
yeah.
So not investing the time to understand what the use case is, what the challenge is, where is the value, spell the difference between success and failure.
Gosh, time. So I find this problem all the time is that, you're working in companies, and again, it's like, especially in San Francisco, it's very product led. It's
Yeah.
all about the product needs time. Product will take time to develop. Product needs resources. And then they're like, we're ready to go to the market. And then they'll hire a marketer who without the resources that are needed and then expect this thing to go viral. And so my funny tagline with my business with Omni AI marketing is if you thought build it and they will come as a business strategy, it is not. That's not how it works. The same care and effort and understanding that goes into building the product, building your business needs to be put into marketing, and you have to give it that runway to succeed and give it the resources. So, I can't emphasize that enough.
People haven't learned from Apple and Amazon yet.
Yeah, no, no. Why? Yeah, let's not get started. It's like, this is what I always tell people too. I'm like, it's not rocket science. It's a system. It's been proven. If you just follow it, you will see the results.
Absolutely.
Okay, so now I know we've actually covered so much territory, but let's get into the AI CMO9. So, number one, you've said AI needs to be seen as a portfolio of technologies rather than a single tool. What does that portfolio view look like in practice for healthcare leaders?
Can I share a slide?
Sure.
Let's hit share. Oh, okay. For whatever reason, it's not working. So anyway, so yeah, you really have to. This was literally the light bulbs going on when the hype around Gen AI started, right? And I've been following AI for a long time. I've been an early user. AI has like most other technologies, especially enterprise SaaS, it has been an evolution, right? So the most mature, for instance, is machine learning, which allows you to predict behavior based on understanding the statistics and the patterns and making predictions, which is the basis for predictive analytics today. Deep learning, which has been around neural networks, which simulates the working of the human brain, looks at unstructured data and then makes sense out of it. Then, of course, there has been natural language processing, natural language generation, which, for instance, a very compelling use case we saw at Tableau was a busy physician or a nurse on his or her rounds looks at a chart, right, in the EMR, and rather than invest the time to interpret what the graph, it's delivered to them in plain language against a plain language query, which again is huge impact. Medical robotics, not traditionally thought about in the context of AI. So everything from surgeries like the Da Vinci robots from Intuitive Surgical, headquartered not very far from where you are, amazing company. I never cease to see the level of innovation they bring about, which is making a little incision and then having this robotic arms orchestrated by a surgeon who could be in the same room or somewhere else.
Yeah.
Treat the patient with basically.
I have had a surgery done like that.
So
Minor, but it was incredible.
exactly. The value proposition is faster recuperation, lesser length of stay in the hospital, etc. Which again obviously has gotten sophistication. It's much more sophisticated with technologies like machine vision, augmented reality, virtual reality, and then of course the big guys in the block, obviously generative AI, which has seen disproportionate hype, has seen most of the billions of dollars in investment from FOMO-driven VCs located where you are. Of course, obviously has huge challenges, hallucinations, indeterminations, bias, etc. And now, of course, the new kid on the block, which I think is the most promising, is agentic AI, which is really a fusion of all these technologies I talked about, or the notion of this hybrid multimodal AI. So it's what I just described is a toolbox. It's a platform comprising multiple modalities. What is striking is if you talk to 10 people about AI, chances are 7 of them will talk about Gen AI as the only
Yes.
AI.
Yeah.
Most of them wouldn't even know. They wouldn't be able to name all of these modalities. So I think the big paradox we're seeing is disproportionate, VC, FOMO driven VC funding, FOMO driven CXO efforts focused on Gen AI, which has returned what 40-50% ROI just by virtue of all of the challenges. I mean, ChatGPT 5 just got released, right? I mean, there's so much of improvement, but the fact of the matter is it's still hallucinating. The hallucinations have just gotten better to the point where it's hard to spot. A great example of this was the FDA, right? Rolling out generative AI and then discovering that the LLMs were actually making up studies that haven't happened.
Oh my gosh, that is very scary.
So in a healthcare context, that's really scary.
Yeah.
I have again a number of blogs. I write about it extensively. So my hypothesis is Gen AI will be subsumed by agentic AI. Agentic AI, again, people synonymously look at agentic AI and AI agents, and the nuanced difference is agentic AI is like the operating system for the AI agents, which in turn would have LLMs or small language models supporting them, would have deep learning, would have machine learning, would have NLP all embedded in there. So we're looking at that hybrid multimodal scenario, hopefully going forward into the world where agentic AI and AI agents dominate. So going from this notion of augmented AI with some of the more mature technologies to really automation of tasks, workflows, processes from generative AI to agentic AI to again the holy grail of artificial general intelligence or really autonomous AI. Probably the best known example is the driverless car where you don't need humans anymore, which obviously has very interesting ramifications for society because again, if you look at the numbers, always take them with a grain of salt. AI is supposed to create 22 million new jobs by 2030, but it's going to eliminate 300 million jobs, existing jobs. So that's a vast disparity. I think there are not enough of people thinking about what are the ramifications of that. There's an arms race going on, arms race between nation states, companies, industries, and in that arms race to get to that holy grail of artificial general intelligence, the wellness of society at large, a lot of the basic roles which are already redundant. New grads, I coach a number of new grads looking for a job. They're struggling because all of those have been replaced by AI. Societal ramifications, especially in terms of white collar jobs that are going to be replaced by when agentic AI and agents really flower. And what does that mean, right? What do those
Yeah.
people do?
Yeah, no, I love that. Thank you for taking us through all of these different forms of AI. And I think that's important for people to understand. So I did a webinar on that very topic of what I like to call now kind of boring AI on the difference between machine learning and like you said, natural language processing. What are all these different aspects of it? And the issue, and this was like 6 years ago that I did this webinar, and the issue that we kept running into in the actual implementation of AI at that point was the problem of data. So if you don't have good data, it's going to impact, your outcomes with AI. This is not one of the questions I was going to ask you, but very briefly, how have things evolved in terms of the ability for companies to use AI, not the generative AI, but some of these other things that we've talked about with this kind of pressing ongoing problem with disparate data, unclean data, all of those types of things. Have you seen improvements or other technologies that are enabling better
I think
AI use?
it's a continuum, right? And various companies are at different stages in the continuum. But what I think has impacted the quality of data is we've had a focus on analytics for the last 10 years at least, manifested in the growth of companies like Tableau and Alteryx. Tableau and Alteryx have been at the forefront, Informatica, right? Which have literally been in the business of self-service, ETL, etc., which has fundamentally been about data cleansing, prepping, normalizing the data, being able to drive algorithms in R and Python, and then tuning those, and then being able to drive predictive analytics, etc. So I think a lot of companies with agentic AI, AI agents, which are being delivered literally on a silver platter via what I call PaaS platforms, platform as a service AI from companies like Salesforce, ServiceNow, Amazon, Google. I think by virtue of the fact that their data is in a good place, are probably the ones you are seeing as first movers who are innovating and seeing value and ROI from their
Yeah.
investments.
Yeah. Yeah, because that piece is critical. And going back to our other conversation here about Gen AI, when I'm working with clients, it's kind of what I tell them is that the reason you need a human is because it isn't perfect. It's going to get you about 80% of the way there, sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less, but you need a human who is an expert to be able to vet it. And I kind of joke about how my job now is highly strategic and then very low level, and then AI is everything in between. It's basically what it's become because it is very important to kind of QA things and vet them, and you need to have that subject matter expertise to know when is it hallucinating. And to your point about the very scary story you told about the making up studies, I've caught it doing similar things where it'll say things and I'll question it. I'll say, where did you get this? Can you prove it? Can you give me the link? And then it'll say, well, it seemed like, and then it'll kind of hem and haw, and I'm like, okay, that was just false information. And so you have to,
MSUing, the
you
product
can't turn your brain off with AI.
make stuff up. Make stuff up.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't do that. That's become part of our culture, but that's a different story. All right. Okay. So, number 2, many still think AI equals generative AI, as we've all just talked about. Why is this a limited and potential risky mindset for organizations making strategic technology decisions? You already touched on it in your previous answer, but give us like a crystallized response of why is it risky to ignore these other modalities?
Absolutely. So think about, I like it, and the reason there's a lot of thought going into calling it a portfolio management approach, right? I mean, companies have been practicing a portfolio management approach with their entire technology stack, right? Look at any company, name any company, it's got ERP, it's got CRM, it's got supply chain management, it is, and so on and so forth, right? Healthcare probably has more systems than any other industry. You've got, in addition to ERP, you've got the electronic health record, you've got nurse systems, you've got which are laboratory information systems. So CTOs have been managing those technologies like a portfolio. So my central hypothesis is because we have this diversity of modalities or technologies which makes up AI, you need to apply those same best practices that you apply to managing your portfolio of technologies to managing your AI portfolio versus saying Gen AI, the be all and end all. And people have made disproportionate investments triggered by a lot of the VCs close to where you are, who have put all the eggs in the Gen AI basket. And now I think what is happening is they are literally morphing into agentic AI agents, having realized this very publicized issues being caused by Gen AI, including stuff pertaining to AI bias, copyright infringement, non-determinism. Ask the same query 5 times and it'll return 3 different answers, and of course hallucination, right, which continues to cloud everything.
Yeah, and so, but the way I look at that is this is such a new technology. And even when I'm testing other AI tools, I tell everybody, because in my job now, I do a lot of testing of tools. I'm talking to CEOs that are developing things. And in the past, I might have an attitude when I was in house where if I got a demo and the demo was half baked, I would not want to talk to that company or that person again. Now, my attitude is actually very different. I look at all of these people as doing their best to innovate over something that is emerging. It's new, it's still a bit unstable, but the genie's out of the bottle. And so you have to go in, as I said, with the expectation a bit lowered, that it's not going to be perfection. And I tell people when they're testing out tools, you know what? If you test a tool out and you like the idea, you like the vision of that company, but it doesn't do what you want, check back in a couple of months because there may have been improvements. And so it's a very different approach, I think, to looking at some of these solutions and tools. That being said, business is business, right? And so if I need to get from point A to point B at a certain time and that tool is not getting me that and it's taking me more work to use it, it's a business at the end of the day and it won't get used. And that's up to the business leaders there at that company to figure it out quickly. So it's more than a science project and an actual viable business tool. All right. So in your portfolio management approach to AI, how should leaders weigh short-term wins against long-term transformational bets?
Absolutely, that's a great question, and that's worthy of about. It's going to be written about extensively in my forthcoming blog post. So I think, as with everything else, adopting a portfolio management approach involves looking at many things, right? First and foremost, where I think a number of CXOs or leaders are making mistakes is starting with which AI should I use, and that's the wrong question to ask. The, as good marketers, the first question you ask is, where is the problem or the challenge? Which personas have those problems or challenges? So, for instance, in the healthcare context, the in the post-COVID era that we live in, the biggest challenge that's keeping CEOs awake at night is physician fatigue. It's nursing fatigue, right? They have been abused by patients, irate patients in the COVID arena. Many of them are leaving the professions and can't be replaced. So that's your big challenge: is how do I alleviate the burden of my physicians, nurses, care managers? I'm not going to be able to hire enough of care managers to take care of my high risk patients. So how do I multiply their capacity, right? So start with that problem statement, identify who the personas are, see what they can accomplish today with enterprise software, and then to that challenge. For instance, a real world example that Lightbeam Health addresses: never enough of care managers, a small coterie of care managers to drive care management for thousands of high risk and rising risk patients who've admitted to the emergency department, would drive a cost through the roof, right? So now you use an AI driven remote patient monitoring tool, for instance, which would, first, of course, use predictive analytics, prescriptive insights to identify who those high risk and rising risk patients are, and then understand specifically where the risk is, enroll them into a remote patient monitoring system, which in our case can be driven by no apps, right? It literally is your landline or your cell phone and a smartphone, and using conversational AI to enroll them, check with them periodically to understand whether they're looking at their vital signs or not, and ensure that everything is done so that they don't get into an acute event which will drive them into the hospital. And this allows care managers to increase their capacity 8 to 10x without hiring additional FTEs. So the value proposition is staring at you right there.
Yeah.
You've just gotten better patient outcomes. You've reduced your 30, 60, 90-day readmission risk. You've saved millions of dollars in terms of those avoidable emergency department visits. You've ensured the well-being of the patients. You've reduced nurse care manager burnout, and you've increased capacity without hiring additional FTEs. So again, clinical, financial, operational outcomes all accomplished with a very judicious use, business case driven use of.
Yeah, excellent. And I think I would encourage people that we're in a time where no matter what your role is, you, in my opinion, need to be talking with technology providers. You need to constantly be networking, doing demos, because you may not know what the solutions are that are out there. So to your point, first of all, you got to start with what problem are you trying to solve? Exactly. But the innovation is so rapid right now that people may have created solutions that you didn't even realize technology could solve. Yep. So as everybody who is looking to go up in their career or consider themselves a business leader, you have to be interacting with all these technology solutions so you can at least even know that there are these solutions that exist to solve these problems. Exactly. And who knows, sometimes if they're experts in your space, such as your company, they may provide a solution that you may not even realize you had that problem until they pointed it out in the opportunity. So you have to keep a very open mind, I think right now, because the amount of innovation and knowledge is it's hard to keep up with.
Absolutely.
All right, number 4. What's an AI-enabled healthcare use case that is already producing measurable improvements for providers, physicians, and patients?
I just kind of answered that, but I think one other area, since we focus on generative AI, because of all the challenges, generative AI has not found a number of use cases, especially in healthcare, right? Who can afford hallucinations in a clinical context? But I think the rockstar application that is finding huge adoption across healthcare is this notion of ambient listening, right, or ambient clinical intelligence, which really is basically LLM-driven smartphone app that records the entire encounter between a physician or a nurse with the patient, and then it'll turn with IVR. It'll turn that into text and let the physician or the nurse look at it within the context of the smartphone, make light edits or correct factual errors, and then upload it, easily into the electronic health record versus spending hours right at the end of seeing patients trying to do that manually on their desktop. So I think that's huge efficiency. So we have obviously seen a slew of applications in that front. From a Lightbeam perspective, we are in the process of embedding ambient listening into our care management application. So the value proposition again is let the physician do what they do best, which is deal with and see patients, engage with patients in a meaningful way without the need to handwrite notes or record all of that and having to enter that themselves. The ambient listening app does that. Possibilities are endless. So after you've diagnosed a certain condition in the patient, what next? You can run predictive and prescriptive analytics within the ambient listening application, which could trigger off agents, right? For instance, scheduling an appointment with a cardiologist that is needed, schedule an appointment with the lab for blood work, right? So all kinds of, the possibilities are endless. So we are seeing significant adoption of ambient listening. Perhaps the biggest adoption is Kaiser Permanente, again pretty close to you, having deployed ambient listening across 22,000 physicians across the Kaiser Permanente healthcare system, and we are seeing that being replicated. And again, the big question is, thus far it has been only deployed for use by physicians, and they're now deployed for nurses as well, which would obviously significantly improve nursing efficiency, also reduce fatigue and burnout. So I think that's
Yeah.
a great
Excellent.
use case and example.
Excellent. I know in business I use Fathom AI. There's a number of AI note-taking apps that have taken off, and I know for me, it's like having an assistant, right? It's
Yeah.
basically like having a virtual assistant, but even next level because of the emails that it auto sends the summaries. It can give you your action items. There's so many interesting things, and I'm particularly a fan of Fathom and and what their CEO is doing over there, because it's actually not just taking a simple use case and saying it's an AI note taking app. It's really taking a position of what are the pain points of the user of this, and can we introduce features that are going to make their lives easier and make business flow better. And you've mentioned agentic AI multiple times. Some of these things are just like the foundational precursor to agentic really taking off. As you said, schedule up with a cardiologist. That will happen when agentic AI starts to really mature, is making those kinds of decisions and going ahead and taking those kinds of actions on your behalf. So, there's a lot more to come, I think, in terms of innovation.
The future is going to be, as the Chinese say, right? We definitely live in interesting times.
So we've talked about this concept of, these different AI solutions from a portfolio perspective. But if you had to pick in B2B enterprise marketing, where are you seeing AI drive the greatest gains in efficiency and conversions today? What stands out to you?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I think the marketing arena is evolving as well. I'm literally figuring this out as we speak. So I think one of the biggest areas, I think the game just changed, right? Your notion of the buyer's journey, which was one to many to one to few, leading to one to one, based on the push model, right? You're pushing out, content and hoping someone's going to. That model just was turned on its head, right? You are now in kind of one-to-one pull, which is being enabled by ChatGPT. What happens today is, if I'm looking for a new X solution, say maybe population health management, I look at ChatGPT. ChatGPT will literally give me an overview of everything that's available. I can do a comparative analysis of feature functionality. It can even ferret out some pricing information. It'll dig up analyst reports telling me what analysts are thinking about which vendor. And so the buyer or the user is so much better informed, right? I think engaging with the sales force is almost at the final stages of where they may have already made their buying decision, which is kind of scary. So your ability to influence them along that buyer's journey, I think, is significantly lowered. But that's how you've got to play the game differently, right? So SEO is now becoming artificial or GEO, right? So
Geo, yeah.
how do you do that? How do you de-anonymize all of those guys who are coming to your website, having done all the research, and then perhaps left without, filling out a form, right? How do you engage with them using a chat bot, provided them, with proactive, white paper or a data sheet or a blog post, or turn that into an engagement with a BDR or a sales rep in real time. So I think that's the world we are going. That's exactly what I'm trying to figure out. I'm going to be writing a blog post on how AI is changing marketing. A very tactical application that we are trying to figure out right now is email marketing, right? Just imagine the thousands, if not millions, of emails being sent out by last century kind of automation, marketing automation applications. We'll not name any of them, but which have pathetic response rates. I've experimented with chat GPT, and we are looking at a number of applications. There's Outreach, there's Lavender, which personalizes now those cold call prospect emails at scale.
Yeah,
We
amazing.
anticipate that'll drive up response rates 2 to 10 times. Who knows? We're experimenting with it as we speak. So I think those three areas: SEO evolving to AIO, GEO, the notion of de-anonymizing your inbound visitors, and then personalizing outbound, emails and campaigns at scale. Even the notion of an AI-enabled SDR, right, which are being delivered. So I think those are at least 4 areas which are going to see. I'm personally pursuing all of them, so I'm eager to see where we'll see the most value. But I think those would be great places to invest in automation and then look at the ROI.
Yeah, and I'm still curious to see the human component in all of this because, as you said, when so much is being sent out that's AI generated, and I know you're probably the same as me, where we spend so much time with AI and AI generated output that it's increasingly easy to spot. It's not just the M dashes, but I know when I see sentence structures, for example, that look very much like typical AI, I actually stop reading. I have a hard time reading it and I stop. And I use AI in my business. But when I'm creating AI driven output, there's a lot of customization that happens. Again, there's a human element that goes into it. So AI makes you go fast, but then you're humanizing it. Then the other thing I keep telling people, so I mentioned Fathom earlier. And one of the reasons I'm a big fan of that tool, it's a great technology, but the CEO is always on LinkedIn. He's kind of building in public. He's talking about his experience. And when you respond on LinkedIn to one of his posts, he responds back. And I think we're going to see a lot more push for CEOs and other executives to get out there. You mentioned the BDRs, the SDRs. This is where I think there is going to be a transformation. I almost feel like the pendulum swung in a way where we were expected to act like robots and do all this menial, mundane. And the more you acted like a robot, the better you were as an employee. And that's going to change. And you now will have the robots doing the robot thing. And the human thing is going to be about interpersonal connection, right? And really trying to understand what are the pain points and how do you kind of almost in a bespoke white glove way bring your customer through the journey. So yeah, I think it's going to be a really very interesting time. All right, so you've built billion-dollar pipelines as we've discussed. When AI is part of the strategy, can you give us a single metric or indicator that tells you it is indeed creating true business value rather than, you said, just kind of jumping on the bandwagon blindly?
Yeah, I think my hypothesis is your metrics and KPIs don't really change much because of AI, right? AI is accelerating it, AI is driving efficiency, AI is driving productivity. But so for instance, since you're talking about pipelines, obviously in a marketing context, my metric of choice is not just lead to MQL conversion, which is a vanity metric, right? There are CMO careers, there are marketing careers lost because they hang their hats based on those metrics which don't matter anymore. To me, the key metric is MQL to opportunity to deal conversion, then cost per opportunity, cost per customer acquisition cost, right? And lifetime value of the customer. So I don't think those will fundamentally change, and I could be reversing that if I talk to you in a year from now. But I think AI will, using all of these AI tools in all of those 4 areas, will enable us to do what we do better. It will potentially lower our cost per MQL. It will potentially lower cost per opportunity. It will help us get to, if we do our inbound, de-anonymizing the audience and engaging with them will potentially drive, form fills or enable us to engage with customers who are ready to buy faster, which drives rapid conversion. But it fundamentally doesn't change the metric. It enables us to do it in an accelerated way. It enables us to lower cost. It enables us to improve the clock speed. So
So,
that's what I'm thinking, right? That's my
yeah.
thought process, and that could change once we have deployed all of these. And I said, oh, wow, we didn't think of that one, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but I will say, so you just mentioned a key word for me, which is accelerate. And I was just speaking this few days ago with Ron Ricci, who used to be a senior executive at Cisco on the marketing and customer facing roles, reporting into John Chambers. And so he and I were talking about the importance of time savings, which in business, increasingly, and as a marketer, most of my energy goes into, are you driving revenue? And yes, cutting cost while you're driving revenue. The conversation is always about revenue and cost, revenue and cost. And I think the time savings is something that has a danger of being overlooked because when you deploy a new technology, it's very easy to say, we're deploying a new technology and away we go. And you're not really taking the time to think about all the time that has been saved, for example, to create an email campaign, to create a strategy, to create a blog post, whatever it may be. And that time savings translates into cost savings, obviously. And it's a faster point to drive revenue. And so I think for marketing leaders and business leaders, they can't just rush, deploy AI, and then only look at revenue. They have to look at all the cost savings that's happening because of it as a valid, reason to deploy
Exactly.
ROI.
A very simple example is if you have 10 salespeople, right, and they spend 5 hours of their day personalizing emails for their primary prospects. Imagine an AI agent that kind of does that for them, literally with 2 or 3 iterations, where they don't have to, they suddenly have now 4 of those 5 hours back to be able to do two prospecting or to be able to spend on deal cycles and get it to a close. That changes the game, right, in terms of efficiency and productivity and savings, right, as well as the cost
100%.
of customer acquisition.
Literally had that conversation this morning with a client, and we're deploying a project exactly about that. Is like it forces you to rethink things that you've been kind of wrote about with your team management and say, oh, okay, if I can save them time over here instead of them just continuing to do what they do, what could they do that's different that could result,
Exactly.
in better outcomes? All right, so number 7, if we look ahead 5 years from now, what could the art of possible with AI in healthcare truly look like, both in care delivery and operational models?
So 5 years is like light years, right? Given the pace at which AI is progressing. But being a soothsayer is not for the faint at heart. I'm not faint at heart. I love playing the visionary. So I think a few predictions. One of the areas within healthcare that is going to see significant or is already seeing significant impact is radiology. I mean, today, if a hospital is paying 5 radiologists $400,000 each to sit in an air-conditioned room, looking at DICOM images, machine learning can do it so much more efficiently, right? So you can, instead of 5 radiologists, you have one radiologist who's basically going to validate all the escalations that machine learning or going forward it's going to be agentic AI with SLMs or LLMs, which is going to identify these 10 images are from patients who are potentially at risk of myocardial infarction or a heart attack or a stroke. Boom, instant escalation to the radiologist workflow. Radiologist looks at it, says, yeah, I mean, 8 of those 10, yeah, are potentially at risk. So they are referred to the cardiologist or their neurologist for an emergency appointment, which basically results in life saved. It results in lower length of stay, huge savings, revenues, as well with cost savings to the hospital and better outcomes for the patient. So I think that's an area where we're going to see that. That to me, because healthcare it's in the business of saving lives. So I think it's not very intuitive to think about the driverless car context, right, in healthcare. But I think that's the one that comes closest. The notion of having physician and nurse assistants based on agentic AI and agents, I think is happening as we speak. We're going to see much more of that. In fact, the scenario I just described where your ambient listening application comes up with the based on the patient encounter, says, oh my God, this patient could potentially be at risk of this form of cancer and so should undergo these 3 tests. Lo and behold, there's a voice conversational AI agent which engages with the patient, sets those appointments up, ensures that they show up and turn in their blood reports, etc., for all of the diagnosis. So I think a lot of that efficiency is there. I think self-service through conversational AI agents is already happening within CRM applications. So I think that'll definitely get momentum. But it's very interesting. I'm reminded of a quote from the head of the Mayo Clinic AI area, right? Who's a celebrity. And his hypothesis or his assertion is AI is not likely going to replace doctors and physicians and nurses in the foreseeable future, but those physicians and nurses who have embraced and are assisted by AI will replace those that are not and do not embrace AI. So I think that kind of sums it up, right, in terms of what is likely going to happen in healthcare.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think these are, again, it's going to be a lot of innovation, doing things differently. And frankly, it's going to be a win-win situation because, we all know how overworked folks are in healthcare. With that level of overwork increases mistakes that are made, and those impact mortality for patients. And so we have to acknowledge that these systems were built at a time where maybe they made sense and the populations were lower and the throughput was lower. But now, even doctors, nurses, everybody's just being treated, right, by insurance like a cog in the wheel just along the way to make more money. And that has to change. That's a whole different podcast. But hoping that AI is going to kind of alleviate some of these things that'll allow the humans in healthcare to kind of get back to patient care, which is what they're supposed to be doing in the first place. So,
And by the way, I'd like to attribute that quote to Dr. John Halamka, who's the head
okay.
of the Mayo Clinic platform, which is literally building out entire AI applications for use in healthcare and also validating those built out by vendors, right, as a service.
Amazing. Okay, so number 8, how do you expect AI's role in B2B marketing to evolve in parallel, and what specific capabilities should CMOs start investing in now?
So I think it's those four areas that I mentioned, in addition to which I think market research is a given. Market research is absolutely right for disintermediation by AI, right? I think the consulting analyst market research business is going to be very, very different. I mean, I'm amazed. I use ChatGPT now. I'm just raring to use ChatGPT 5. I'm amazed by what it shows. So like you, to the earlier point, I do not use AI for writing, but I use AI to churn up all the research I need, which saves me hours, right? And then I
Yeah.
prefer to write the old-fashioned because it's got to convey my emotions. It's got to convey my quirks or the way I write, right? Which literally gives it authenticity, right? Because people can spot LLM written, prose versus, things. But market research, the notion of personalizing, emails and communication at scale, the notion of de-anonymizing website visitors, and I think this entire, huge area of SEO, evolving to AIO, GEO. Those are all areas. The notion of, again, promotions, right? Why would you have a banner, right? A static banner on a website when you can potentially personalize it for that visitor based on his or her intent signals, right? So I
Yeah.
think those are all obvious areas. These are already happening. I mean, who knew that Zoom Info is now virtually an account-based marketing platform today with all of the innovation and AI capabilities that are built out, right? So I think it's exciting. I think CMOs will be challenged. They'll have so much of choice. They'll have this Chinese menu of AI apps which do what each other do. They overlap into other areas. I'm literally experiencing that as I'm going to make those choices. So betting on the right horses, right? Meet your tactical needs, but is also a good investment for the long term. Is well integrated with your CRM and marketing automation platform. I think is the big challenge that CMOs, that visionary strategic CMOs will have to deal with, while ensuring they can drive that tactical productivity, to your point, right? Drive up revenues while cutting costs from a marketing engagement process.
Yeah, absolutely. So much territory is covered here. So number 9, you have a global platform and audience, and we talked about your visionary approach to your work. So what is your vision for how AI can be implemented in ways that are ethical, they're inclusive and beneficial across the healthcare system? Give us like a little framework, if you will, of what your vision is on. deploying AI across healthcare?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I'm going to invoke some of the things I already spoke about, right? Which is start with where is the challenge? Where is, I mean, as I mentioned, healthcare has more than 100 enterprise software systems. But despite that, things are broken and things are disconnected. You know, duplication of patient data is not clean. Patients go through the system and feel that there's no one, you know, they're not being heard or their needs are not being addressed. So pinpoint the areas where you've got the biggest challenges, where the fires are. Understand why your current set of enterprise apps are not meeting your needs. Diagnose whether the data you have is in a state that is clean enough, that is deduped, so that you have unique patient identities without duplication across all of your systems. Those are three fundamental building blocks, right? Once you've done that, understand how do you address those pain points? Which persona is it impacting the most? Is it your nurse, care manager, technician, physician? What is the challenge? What is the pain point that you're going to address? Is it burnout, efficiency, not having enough of FTEs? And then again, look at the portfolio management approach. What tool, right, from this portfolio of tools do we bring forth? Do we have build versus buy? Do we have the expertise to do it in-house? Age experts, right? Do we build it ourselves? Do we use a platform as a service platform from Agentforce by Salesforce, Amazon, Google, Notable, ServiceNow, and then bring all of those variables together, keeping that value front and foremost, right? Here's the fire we are trying to put out. This is the underlying challenge. This is the KPI that indicates whether we'll be successful or not. And that should dictate everything you put in place. And at the end of the day, again, measure whether the KPI or the metrics and that pain point, the fire.
So that's what I was going to say is like you basically described a framework, which is what marketers have been using for many, many
Exactly.
years. And the danger with AI is because there's so much of it and there's a push to deploy it and there's so many different options. As I mentioned, the measurements and the KPIs. And in this case, it may be about the time savings and efficiency. What is the specific problem that you're trying to solve, right? Be very specific, very niche, almost laser focused. And then it's going to be much easier for you to prove out that what is AI's ROI and then build from there.
Put that with a high level metaphor, which
Yeah.
lays out the holy grail, right? So when you and I go into Amazon recommends, I'm a photographer, I'm an avid photographer, recommends the lens I want. They recognize I'm a spiritualist. And there's this notion of precision medicine or personalized medicine, right? Which is not all forms of cancer demand chemotherapy. So imagine what a life impacting, what a life changing impact that has. So driving AI to really personalize healthcare for you and I, just as Amazon personalizes the retail experience someday.
Gosh, we need it desperately. All right, so help our listeners find you. So you've mentioned your blog a couple of times. Where can people find and read your thought leadership? Please share. What's the best way for us
Very
to keep
easy,
learning from you?
andyday.com. Just Google me. I think I've put a lot of effort into my website. My website will lead you to my curated thought leadership portfolio, which is andyday.com/thought leadership, which resides on LinkedIn. Anything you want to learn about me or my writings, andyday.com. You can just Googling me will take you there. Is the one-stop shop to all of the thought leadership, my podcast, my webinars, and everything that I
Amazing.
including this one. This is an amazing conversation. And
Oh, thank you so
thank you for the
much.
opportunity.
Thank you so much for joining. And listeners, thank you. Please don't forget to follow and share if you've enjoyed this content. We're available on all the major platforms for you to listen to and also on YouTube. If you want to watch it, it's at Your AI CMO. And so we look forward to many great conversations. And Andy, I'm so excited to learn from you. So I'm going to go on your website and see what I can learn. Thank you so much for joining us.
Really appreciate the opportunity.
Take care.